Hi everyone, this is Jeff with Hanini Gems again. Maya is joining us, but she's off camera today, so you're just stuck with me once again. And I thought today I would walk you through something that a lot of people have little to no familiarity with. And if you're going to take an interest in opals and you're looking to purchase opals or opal jewelry, this is something that you absolutely need to know and understand. And that is how opals are graded and valued. Now, we're not going to go into the dollar values of opals so much today. We're really going to focus more on one aspect in particular, and we'll touch on a second aspect a little bit that has to do with how opals are graded and valued. And so those two issues that we're going to talk about, first and foremost, is going to be body tone, and then we'll talk a little bit about brightness as well. Body tone is one of the main determiners of the value of an opal. And so when we look at opals, we need to determine what the body background color is. And this is not always an easy thing to do. And to do so requires a very, very specialized piece of equipment, which is what you see on the screen here, a body tone scale. It's actually a simple little chart, usually laminated. This is not a great picture of the one that I'm using. You'll see it's actually quite a bit brighter and you can make out the different colors a little bit better on it. But this will do for us to talk about on our presentation here. But body tone is a major factor when grading opals and determining their value. And so what you see here is you see a grayscale continuum from N1 on the left all the way up to N9 on the right. And so N9 are white opals and N1 are black opals. But if you look at the titles across the top here, you're going to see that there's actually three different categories stretched out over those 9 body tones. And so legally, anything that is an N1 to an N4 body tone is considered a black opal. If you go lighter than N4, you can no longer call the opal legally a black opal. Now you must call it either a dark opal or a semi-black opal, and that covers opals that have body tones of N5 and N6. And then anything brighter than the N6, so the N7s, 8s, and 9s, are light opal and white opal. But black opal is something that, because of its value, people have a tendency to overuse and improperly use. And many times dealers misuse it intentionally to try and mislead customers as to the value of the stones that they're selling them, which is highly illegal, number one, and it's highly unethical as well because they know better. A lot of people mistakenly, without knowing, think that if you see any black in an opal at all, that qualifies it as a black opal. And that is absolutely not the case. It needs to be a body tone of N1 to N4 to be called a black opal. Now, as you would imagine, the black side of this body tone scale is the more expensive side, all other things being equal. So if you have two stones that display the same colors, the same coverage, the same brightness, the same quality of stone, but you have one that's, let's say, an N5 or an N6, and another one that's an N1 or an N2, the N1 or N2 is going to be many times more valuable. And so typically, depending on the opal, the locale, the colors in it, the pattern in it, obviously these things affect opal value as well. But N9 opals, the white opals, you may be talking anywhere up to, let's say maybe, $300, $400, $500, $600 a carat at the highest end. Whereas at the black opal end of it, the N1, N2, especially end of our scale, you could be talking with the proper opal, upwards of $25,000 per carat. Again, that's per carat, not per stone. So that's how you get opals that can be worth just astronomical amounts of money. So we're going to kind of focus in on body tone today. We'll talk a little bit about brightness here in just a moment. because that's another factor, and that's indicated on this chart as well. Brightness is a much less exact science than body tone, and there's actually a disclaimer to that down here at the bottom. It says the brightness scale isn't as exact as the body tone scale and is only a guide. And so basically you're looking at how bright the colors are presenting on the opal, how much flash that they have. And so that's something that you look at also. And it's a little less exact because it's a little bit more open to interpretation. We'll see that body tone really is not open to interpretation. I'll show you how we determine body tone in just a moment. But opals that just have a little bit of color, maybe they flash a little color from one angle, but then that color kind of disappears or becomes greatly dimmed, especially because of the destructive interference that we talked about in a previous show. You could get a brightness 1 opal. And then as the opal brightens up and reflects more light back to the viewer's eye, you can get B2, B3, B4, and then the brightest of bright opals are B5s. Now, this brightness scale has been replaced to some extent with a new one that I believe goes from B1 to B7, but it's also reversed, where B1 is now the brightness, B7 is the dimmest. It's one that has been adopted by an opal association, but it's one that for some reason really hasn't caught on yet amongst opal dealers. I follow a couple of very, very well-known opal dealers, and they are still using this B1 to B5 brightness scale, where B1 is the dimmest, B5 is the brightest. Okay, so I'll mention when we take a look at some actual stones here in a little bit, I'll kind of point out some of the brightnesses just to kind of give you an idea with actual stones, but this picture kind of gives you an idea. But body tone is really going to be the main focus today because it's one that you have to understand. Otherwise, you're asking to be taken advantage of when you go to purchase opal. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the body tone scale chart, the actual chart that I have. Again, this is just a photograph of it. You'll see it's actually a much brighter, better contrasted chart in just a moment. This is a great little chart. I wish I could purchase new ones of this. There are similar kinds of things that are available on sites like opalauctions.com. This one actually came from Black Opal Direct, and Justin Thomas over there had these created some years ago, and I was lucky enough to pick one up when they were selling these, but they no longer carry these. So if you are interested in getting one of these charts, this type of chart is available at places like opalauctions.com as one that I'm aware of. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the computer feed here. I'm going to switch over to my cell phone camera so that we can take a look at the actual body tone and brightness scale chart, and we can take a look at, I don't know, about a dozen and a half or so opals that I pulled out for you so we can kind of take a look at different examples of each of the different body tones. So we'll see how well this comes through, but here's an overview shot of the opals that I've selected for you guys today to look at. And there's my actual Black Opal Direct body tone and brightness chart. And so again, on the left side of this, we have our N1, our blackest of black, all the way up to the right where we have our N9, which are whites. Now I apologize for the residue that's on there, but in the past I've actually used some adhesive to actually stick opals to the chart. What we're going to do is we're going to start at the N9 side of things, and we'll take a look at a nice white opal and talk about how we actually match it to a body tone, and we'll see if you guys can really pick up on it. It may not come through great on the camera, we'll see, but we'll do our best. So this is a beautiful example. First of all, these are all Australian opals that I have chosen for you today with a wide range of colors and all the different body tones. So this is a beautiful light colored, light bodied opal. There's a little bit of a healed fracture in there right along the edge that when it gets bezeled, that will get covered up.
And it has some beautiful colors that are being displayed in it. But what we're going to be looking at today is the actual body tone. And this is actually an N9 white opal. And so what you do on this, and it actually is going to appear to be a little bit more like an N8, but if you were seeing this in person, you would see it's clearly an N9. Just on camera, it comes out looking a little bit darker than it actually is. And I'm sure that has to do with the contrast of the camera. But basically, the idea is that when you are grading opals and looking at their body tone, what you are doing is you are ignoring any and all color in the stone, and you're just looking for the background tone. And it's going to be a grayscale tone typically, with the exception of some of the honey background opals and things like that. But what you're going to do is you're essentially going to ignore the color, and you're going to slide the opal along the different colors until you find the one that basically kind of makes the opal body blend in with the background. And so this one actually looks a little bit too dark to be an N9 here, but again, you can kind of get an idea depending on where the light reflects that it kind of changes it. But if this was in hand, this actually is truly an N9 opal. But the idea is you move it back and forth, and you see that, okay, well, that's definitely too dark. The N7 is too dark for the body tone of my opal, so I need to move back to the light one, and you kind of zero in on it little by little. And that's the way that you determine the body tone of an opal. Now, again, because of the contrast, this isn't coming through quite as clearly as I would have liked, but that's all right. We're going to make the best of it. See if I can adjust this light and if I can get it to work any better for me here. Not really. My hand kind of helps a little bit if it's in the right spot. Okay, so anyway, that's going to be an N9, and then we're going to move to a couple of examples of N8 opals. And again, these are looking a little more yellowish for some reason in this light. So I wish I had a better light that I can use to show you guys, but let's see if I move it over here, if it makes much of a difference. Yeah, it's still coming out kind of honey bodied, but maybe what we'll do is, but if you saw these in more natural light, which is really what you want to do, you want to kind of grade these things in multiple lights, but these actually will come out looking like N8s. The N7 is definitely too dark, and this guy doesn't really have that honeyish kind of tone in hand that it's coming through on the camera, so it's a little bit unfortunate. We have our N7 opals here. And then we drop down to some N6s. Now, I'm going to kind of focus a little more on these because these tend to be showing a little more true to their color for some reason. And again, that has to do with the light that I'm using and the contrast of the camera. But if you take a look at this guy, if I move this guy over here, again, we need to ignore the blues and the greens, and we need to kind of pick up on the gray background color that's kind of behind it. And so you're kind of looking for spots where you don't have a lot of bright color, and you're looking to see, and you can see like on this little bit of edge there, that it's a bit darker than the N7. But if I move it over into the N6, now we look like we're getting into the right color. If I move over to the N5, you can see that the N5 is a little bit darker than the body tone that I'm seeing along the edges of this opal. So I would grade this as an N6 opal. Now here we have an interesting one. I've graded this as an N6, but this one has some N6 and some N5 areas. So you can see that there's some lighter spots that are N5 or N6, but the center area is a little bit darker, and you see that it matches the N5 section a little bit better, but you can see those edges are too light for N5. And so when that happens, when you have more than one body tone in an opal, number one, it has a tendency to drop the value of the opal just a little bit because it's not consistent with itself. But also, you kind of average it out, and you kind of have to take a look at it and say, okay, well, if it's half N6 and half N5, then it's kind of a 5.5, and it could go either way. But if there's a little more N6 to it, then you would tend to grade this towards the N6 end. And I would grade this one as an N6. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this one, this is a very, very beautiful and very, very unique opal. What makes this opal quite unique, besides its beautiful pattern and flash, is it's a double-sided stone. And it has a completely different pattern where it has this pin fire on the backside. And so if we were to take a look at this side definitely is much heavier N6 than it is N5. You can see you have this kind of almost vertical, slightly diagonal stripe going through it that I would classify maybe as N5, but about 2/3 of this opal would really be an N6, so I would classify this as an N6. Okay. Now we get into some slightly darker stuff. This one's showing a little bit light, but you see if I take this guy and put him over here, he's a little bit darker. You can see in this little area here at my tip of my fingernail, and also this area up here where you can see that body tone a little bit better. It's a bit too dark for an N6, but it seems to match quite well with the N5. So I would grade this as an N5 opal. This is also a very, very good example of an opal with tremendous brightness. So this is an opal that I would probably classify as a brightness of 4+, as opposed to, let's say, something like this that might be more of a brightness of 3. Now it has some really bright flash from that angle, but it has some dimmer flash from that angle, and so we would need to kind of mitigate that. Now you see that beautiful green flash is quite bright, but you don't see it from every angle, and you need to take that into account and kind of come up with an average for it. And here's another N5 opal. You can see it blends in quite nicely with that. It has some areas that would be N4. If only the whole stone was N4, that would be great, but really when you see this in person, it is more of an N5 opal. It has some beautiful colors. This is another lightning ridge piece with some great color and pattern, some beautiful aquas and fiery oranges and things in there. Absolutely gorgeous. And that would be an N5. So that's just a little bit out of the range of being considered a black opal. That would be semi-black. With this opal sitting here, it's, I would say, probably worth kind of in the range of maybe $300 or so a carat, give or take a little bit. I'd have to look at it under a loupe before I made a final determination on that. But if this guy was sitting over here and as an N4 black opal instead, you're probably talking about minimum $500 a carat. So that's the difference that one square can make when you're talking about semi-black versus black. Now we're getting into the N4, the black opals. Now here's a picture stone. We call it a picture stone because it has a lot of potch in the face along with the color. And a lot of times they can give you the essence of almost a picture being drawn. Very, very cool stone. But this is definitely an N4. Notice if I move this to the N5, it's definitely too dark to be an N5. Again, we're ignoring the color and we're looking at just the body tone. But when I slide it over to the N4, now we're matching better. If I slide it over farther to the N3, clearly it's lighter in body tone than the N3. So I would classify this one, I would grade it as an N4. Now this one has color in some areas that I would say is a brightness of maybe 3. But then we have areas with no color whatsoever. So that would be a brightness of color of 0. So I would classify this kind of as a brightness of 1.5 to 2 overall as an average. Here we have another N4. And this one I pulled out specifically. It's got a very, very cool shape to it. But this guy has ridiculous brightness. And this is a good example of an opal that, while it doesn't have a lot of brightness there, that right there is what a B5 brightness of 5 looks like, to give you an idea. Now, if it did that from every angle, I would call this a B5. It's got a couple angles where it doesn't quite do that, so I would probably call this about a 4, 4.5. But it's got some really cool pattern, but that would be another N4 black opal, which is going to have some significant value to it. And then we continue to move over, and now we get into a couple of N3 opals. This one is another picture stone. You can see the stripes of potch in the face of it. If I can pick it up here and show it to you. Got some interesting stripes of color and potch in there. Some nice bright flashes of green, but this would be an N3 opal. You can see it's a bit too dark to be an N4. Definitely fits better in the N3. Here's another one that I would classify as an N3. Again, has some quite bright flash from certain angles, not so much from others. So again, that would have to be averaged out. There's the good foil kind of color look to it. So that would be another N3 opal. Now we're getting down to the blackest of the blacks. I have a couple of N2s for you. This is a really, really pretty stone. It doesn't have a tremendous amount of brightness, but it's got this beautiful pinfire pattern to it. Sorry about the fingerprints on there that are marring the beautiful polish, but you can see the color. Now you can see this one along the edges is a bit lighter, and it's more of an N3, maybe even an N4, probably an N4 along this edge, but an N2 through most of it. So I might even average this out as more of an N3 if I went to grade this, but it would still be considered a black opal. These guys are truer N2s, one with quite a bit more brightness than the other. Although these particular blues pick up very, very nicely on the camera. They're not quite as vivid in the hand, but they are still quite beautiful. You can see there is a bit of potch in the face, so that's going to bring your value down just a little bit. But there is quite good coverage for the most part. And then here's another N2 with just some absolutely beautiful killer blue and green tones in it. And then finally, I have one N1 example for you. That's the blackest of black opals. It doesn't have great brightness, but it does have that N1 body tone to it. It's got some greens and blues, a little bit directional, and then from some directions, you see some oranges and reds flash. And those oranges and reds on that N1 black body tone start to get into some money. So this is actually a beautiful little ring stone, subtle, but quite rare. So that gives you an idea of what we talk about when we talk about body tone of an opal. And that's the first thing that you want to look at really when you're grading opals. And again, as I mentioned, there are other factors, and we'll get into other factors in another video. Again, we mentioned brightness today a little bit as well, but pattern is going to be a big one. So there are rarer patterns and there are more common patterns, and the rarer the pattern is, all other things being equal, the more valuable the stone. And then again, you get into things like the overall color coverage. Are there areas of potch? Are there not areas of potch? Is it all color? Do you have a mixture of patterns? All of these things are going to affect the per carat value of the opal. And then also opals from different regions can be more valuable as well. So a dark opal from Lightning Ridge is going to be worth a bit more money typically than a dark opal that you may find from Mintabee or from Cooper Pedy or one of those kind of areas, just because there's a lot less of opal of that kind of quality that comes out of that area. And since less is found, it's more valuable. So anyway, that gives you kind of an idea of this amazing tool, which is the body tone scale and brightness scale chart. And again, if you are serious about getting into opal and investing in opal, whether it's jewelry, whether it's loose stones, whether it's cutting it yourself, you're going to want to get yourself one of these scales, because without this tool, you cannot accurately grade an opal. It's that simple. It's not something that you can really just eyeball with any kind of reliability unless you've been doing it for 30 or 40 years. So you don't want to take that chance because you don't want to list an opal as being, let's say, an N4, which is a black opal, when in fact it's really an N5 or an N6, which is semi-black, because you're misleading people, and we don't want to be doing that. So anyway, that is our show for today. I thought you would find that quite fascinating and interesting and useful. So we hope to see you here next Thursday at 7 p.m. or so Pacific Standard Time for our next show. Thanks so much and have a great evening.